Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Liam and this is my hobby room, and today we're going to be doing one of my most requested videos ever. This is my How I Paint video. Yes, I am finally doing it. I've been asked many times, can you show me how to paint? Can you show me how you paint? That's what we're going to do in this video. The reason I haven't done it before is kind of a pain in the ass, but for you, oh, anything for you. Now, before we start, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel for more awesome Gunpla content and like this video. Just down in the thing, down there. You know where it is. Now, my painting style requires you have some familiarity with an airbrush. Unfortunately, there are no shortcuts to getting good with an airbrush. You just have to practice, practice, practice. It's the only way, and to that end, I have a couple tutorials I'll link up here and down in the thing down there, so you can check those out. That's not what this video is going to be about, otherwise it's going to be much too long, and I've done a few of those airbrush tutorial videos already, so today we're just going to go into my painting style. Disclaimer, I am not a master airbrusher, I'm not an expert painter, I just do it a lot, and I have done it a lot. I've made a ton of mistakes, and that's the only way I've got anywhere. I've made mistakes and then learned from them. So isn't that fun? It's a fun way to do things. So keep that in mind while you're watching. This may not be the best way to paint, it's just how I do it. Now, I got both my airbrushes and all my airbrush equipment from BC Hobbies. Check the link down in the description below. Check them out for all your hobby needs. We got lots of stuff. Lots of airbrush stuff. And if you need help with anything, you can just ask your old pal Liam at Liam's Hobby Room. Now, in this video, I plan on showing you exactly what tools and supplies I'm using and how I'm using them. As long as you know how to use an airbrush and you have some level of control with it, my painting style is really not anything special. It's not hard to do, it just takes a bit of practice. For the majority of this video, we'll be using my trusty sidekick, the Iwata HPCS Eclipse. This is a fantastic all-rounder airbrush. It can do pretty much anything. The only customization I've done to this airbrush is I've added the crown cap attachment. Now, the crown cap attachment doesn't make you a better airbrush user. All it does is help narrow the spray pattern of your airbrush so you can hit finer areas with a little bit more control. Now, because I haven't started painting it, I can't be sure, but we might end up switching over at some point to my Iwata Custom Micron, which is another fantastic brush that does an extremely fine spray pattern. It just requires a little more technical understanding and a practice hand. As an air compressor, we're going to be using my Iwata Ninja Jet. I love this air compressor. I've used it for many, many, many years. By no means is it the fanciest Iwata air compressor out there. It's just a nice one that I like. Now, one of the most important tools we're going to be using today is a dual cartridge respirator. Make sure you're using one of these if you're painting with any type of solvent-based paint. That's enamel paint, alcohol-based paint like the Tamiya acrylics line, or lacquer paint. Make sure it is a dual cartridge respirator that filters both fumes and particulates. If you're painting with water-soluble acrylics, this is less of a concern. The final piece of important equipment we'll be using today is my spray booth. Now, what my spray booth does is it sucks up all the particulates and the fumes of the paint that I'm spraying. The particulates get stuck in the filter and the fumes get sucked right through the spray booth and jetted outside of the house. Any of the particulates and fumes that it doesn't catch, my dual cartridge respirator will. Just for safety, I also like to have an air purifier going on in my hobby room at the same time. Now, as this video progresses, I'm really only going to be elaborating on things if they are germane to my painting style. If we're talking about spraying water-soluble acrylics or using like a siphon-fed airbrush or something, none of that is anything to do with my painting style, so I'm not going to be talking about it. So buckle up, you asked for this. Let's get painting. So first up, let's talk about priming. So we're just going to jump right in. I've selected a few chunky pieces here that can clearly illustrate how I go about painting my kits. So first up, 99% of the time I'm priming with Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. The only exception to this rule is if I plan on using yellow, magenta, or green as a base coat. In those cases, I'll usually spike Mr. Surfacer 1500 White primer with one of those colors to help build up the tones. But for this example, we're just going to keep it simple with black. You'll be able to see any mistakes on the surface of your kit while you're priming, so you may want to go back and fix those if you catch them. I like to completely cover the piece, even if certain areas aren't in direct view, like behind the ankle armor or inside pauldrons. This means that even if the kit is viewed from a suboptimal angle, every single surface, no matter how small or insignificant, is painted properly. It also helps with natural shadows, as the fade to black in these areas make them look recessed and allow the rest of the paint job to pop. Optional step number 1, highlights. I don't always do this, but if I'm painting a kit that's predominantly monochromatic, like Guel's de Lanza or the Zeku lines, I like to thin white primer and spray certain highlight areas where I want the saturation and brightness to be really noticeable. For all the steps in this video, perhaps with the exception of priming, you want your paint to be very thin. We're not covering the whole piece here, just some key areas for the lighting effect. Time for the base coat. Now that we have an evenly primed piece that's free of any imperfections or at least surfaced to a level of satisfaction, we can thin and spray our base coat. So after you figure out what colors you want to use on your model, you can use some simple color theory to figure out what you need as a base coat. So for instance, because I want this piece to be very bright red, I'm base coating in a darker red, spraying very thin coats and being careful not to spray all the way to the edge of the piece. This is the main technique here, if you can even call it that. The goal is to have a base coat that's brighter in the center and fades to its darkest point around the edges while maintaining hue and color fidelity throughout. If you keep your spray pattern thin, there'll be more contrast between coats, but if you spray wide, there'll be more of a natural blend. You'll have to play around with this until you get the look that you want. Time for the main coat. Now we're going to spray over this base coated part, essentially highlighting the piece until we get the desired level of contrast. But before we get into this section, here's a pro tip for great looking model kits. Never use pure white or pure black as your main coat. Both of those shades should only be used to tint or shade other colors, or in the case of black, be used as a base coat. The reason? They do nothing for the eye. There's no tonal variation for you to follow. It doesn't matter what the details are like on your kit if they don't stand out. So painting a model kit is a great way of illuminating great design choices made by the kit's designer. In some cases that can be you if you're scratch building, but if you're building a model kit, it's whoever made the model kit. So don't paint over it, paint with it. Okay, so main coat time. Think of each face of the part you're painting like a target with multiple rings. You're aiming for the center, or in most cases just above the center where the light's hitting, and pulling the color out into the next ring of the target. But as we do so, we let up on the trigger to avoid spraying too heavily. This leads to a nice gradient between the rings. Continue this philosophy through to the last ring, aka the edge of your piece, as desired. Pay special attention while you're painting to thinning your paint properly so you don't get any speckling, and always remember to spray test before putting any paint on your model kit. If you start to notice the part that you're painting is getting really wet with paint, that's a really good sign that you should probably have moved on from that face and move on to a different face. You'll have a great looking piece as long as you keep your coat super thin and pay attention to how you're painting. Final highlight. Now, depending on the brightness of your main coat, you may want to go in and add a little highlight. This can be tricky if you haven't had much practice with your brush, as it's easy to spray too much and cover your previous work with a lighter color. So dial in your PSI to whatever comfortable level allows you to get a tight spray pattern. Using a crown cap here can help, but you don't necessarily need one, especially if you're painting Gunpla. The difference in precision here is really going to be up to your skill level. In my experience, the crown cap here doesn't really change it that much. It's more up to the skill of your airbrushing and also the kind of airbrush that you're using, because there's lots of different kinds. And hand painting. If you spend enough time with me on Liam's Hobby Room, you might remember how much I absolutely hate masking. If it's a small enough area in question, I usually just will paint it by hand. Typically I use water-soluble acrylics for this, like Vallejo or the Army Painter, though sometimes my results are messier than I'd like, and usually just sucking it up and masking leaves me with much better results. Just some food for thought. Gloss coat. So by now all of the main painting is done on this kit. You've done your base coat, your main coat, you've done all your highlights, and you've done your hand painting if you're going to do any. All of the things that need to be painted have been painted, and now it's time for the first clear coat, which is gloss, or semi-gloss. It doesn't really matter here for our purposes. Partially assemble the model kit into easily paintable components. That's what I do. So I'll assemble like the legs, and then I assemble the arms, and I keep them separate. I put them on little painting sticks, and I take care to move the parts around while I'm spraying so you can get in all the little nooks and crannies you could potentially view the kit from. Those angles, those are all important. You may want to bend elbow and knee joints to get complete coverage and then bend them back, but to paint the rest of it. But just make sure you give those parts enough time to dry in between bending so you don't leave a big old fingerprint in the gloss coat. This step not only seals in all of your paintwork, but it provides a nice slick surface for the next step, which is decals and panel lining. I'm not really going to go into how decals are applied because that's not what this video is about, but apply however many decals you want. Because we applied a nice gloss coat, the decals won't silver when they dry. They'll slide around however they need to on the gloss surface until you found the perfect spot, and then you can melt them down with your favorite decal setting solution. And after that, it's time to panel line. I do this with a few oil-based colors and the brush, and then I clean up the excess with some odorless thinner. Now, again, this glossy surface helps the paint glide around and flow into all the recesses, and that's one of the reasons I really like using oil-based paints for this. Another reason is they stay workable for a few days and tend to dry in an irregular way, rather than a thick line, which makes things look a little more lifelike. After panel lining, we've only got 2 more steps. Next one up is chipping. Chipping can be a very easy thing to go overboard on if you're not careful, so take it really slow, and as you're doing this, think about exactly where you want your weathering to be, and more than that actually, think about why it's there. If you just cover your entire model kit in little chips, you kind of lose the point of it. Chipping is supposed to occur on certain areas of the kit that are the most weathered. Because of the scale of this kit, because remember this is, in this case, a 1:144 scale Gunpla, it's scaled down 144 times, you want to make sure those chipping areas are just as specific as they need to be, otherwise they'll all blend together and it's going to look like a kind of a mess. Now the way I do chipping is I take some water-soluble acrylic paint and I put it in my little paint palette here, and then I use a little makeup wedge. Sometimes I rip them up to get more of an irregular pattern, and I just dab them in the paint. After I dab them, I make sure they're not covered in paint because that will kind of ruin the effect. And then I just gently dab the makeup sponge in certain areas where I want the chipping to occur. Some key areas that can really benefit from some chipping are the feet, the knee pads, the bottom of the front skirts, pretty much the bottom of any armor. And keep in mind for chipping, or at least the way that I do it, the chipping should get lighter as you move up the kit, as your eyes move up the kit. And I don't mean lighter as in color, I mean there should be fewer and fewer chips. That's because certain areas of your mobile suit will be more heavily damaged or worn than other areas. For instance, the feet and the bottoms of the ankle armor will have more wear and tear than the upper parts of the arms, for instance. Most of the time. I don't know, sometimes you can wing it, but that's what I like to do. Once you've carefully applied all of your chipping, now it is time for us to do the final coat. Matte clear coat, or top coat, or whatever you want to call it. I like to do this while keeping the components of the model kit separate, so do the arms separately from the legs. Nothing is really put together in the sense that you don't have a full, complete model kit yet. Now be careful while you're bending these parts because you don't want to put too much matte coat inside of these areas, just so you don't wear and tear and rip up the paint. Now that our kit is completely matte coated, what we can do is take our little glossy bits like our clear pieces and gloss stickers. If those are things you'd like to use in your kit, or if they're things that come with your kit, now's the time to put those on because you're finished. And those are pieces you didn't want to get covered in matte coat, so it's good to have those separate. And now you can admire your finished product. That's essentially the long and short of it. That's how I paint. That's all there is to it. It's really not difficult to do. It just takes practice. So if this is something you'd like to do, make sure you give it a go. Practice, be patient with yourself. That is really important because no one gets good immediately. It's something you have to work at. The more you paint, the more your confidence will grow. So just keep that in mind. Don't be too hard on yourself. And remember, this isn't the only way to paint, this is just how I do it. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Keep those questions coming. I love talking to you guys about airbrushing, about Gunpla, about all that stuff, about hobby things in general. I hope this video was illuminating for you. I hope it showed you how I paint, because that was the goal. That's the goal of the video. And I hope you take care of one another, give your moms a hug, and see me next time on Liam's Hobby Room.